at the University of Texas.
Yeah, we were fired, and it was right. The next thing we did was have this free class, and the next thing after that was launch our own MBA program.
And so what was the rationale for dispensing with you guys? I mean, it must have been somewhat difficult given the fact that, it was half the students, it was very popular.
Yeah, there was an outcry, but as the dean put it to the students at that point, you are not our customers. Our customers are the pursuit of scholarly knowledge. And so your opinion doesn't really matter, was what they were told. So anyway, we spun off. It was successful. It was a lot of fun. And really, I'm now, still doing some business things, mostly teaching. This program's a lot of fun. And then we come to kind of one of the most important things in my life, and that is our two young boys are in Montessori school. And they're just about...
Okay, so you had them after you left the University of Texas
Yes.
and started this now independent program.
Right. So this
you didn't have accreditation for the independent program?
We did get accreditation.
You did?
We managed to get accreditation because we won all these awards, and they had to give us accreditation.
And who awarded you accreditation?
SACS. We had SACS accreditation through a small university that my great-grandfather had been president of at the turn of the century.
And SACS is?
The Southern Accrediting Association. So it's one of the regional accreditors.
Right, so you got associated with a small college, but it didn't matter because as long as you have accreditation, you have accreditation. Right. And so accreditation was set up so that in principle, so that there was some, what would you say, consistency, reliability, and validity to the assignation of a degree. I mean, that's the theory.
Well, that's the theory. What it really serves as, of course, is a protection of the cartel.
Right.
I mean, it's not really that, but we managed to get it. Wasn't an issue, and we built the program. By then, I've got these two children, Charlie and Sam, and they're about to leave from Montessori to get ready to go to elementary school. So I go to see the very best teacher in the very best middle school in Austin that's teaching our daughter, who's older. And I said, when should we move the boys into regular school? And I'll never forget this. This gentleman was an African-American. He looked like Abraham Lincoln, tall, stately, and he said, as soon as possible. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, once they've had that kind of freedom, they won't want to be chained to a desk for 8 hours a day and talk to them.
So you get them in chains young.
And I was kind of stunned. And I said, well, I don't blame him. I just blurted that out. And he looked down at the ground for the longest time. And he looked up and he had tears in his eyes. And he shook his head very quietly. And he said, I don't either. So I went home that day and I told Laura, I said, I don't know if we're going to homeschool. I don't know if we're going to start a school. But our boys, the best teacher in this town, just told me not to put them in traditional school. So we're going to do something else.
Do you know Paul Gaudy?
No.
Okay, Gaudy, I hope I have his name right. He was Teacher of the Year in New York State a number of years. And he died, unfortunately. I wanted to interview him, but that was never possible. Yeah. He was no admirer of the current education system, let's say. And he wrote a history of the education system, which was extremely interesting. He pointed out that the public education in the United States, I was investigating this because I was wondering why our school systems are so bad at fostering individual vision.
Yes.
Because it's such a lack. I thought, why? This is such a lack. There's something going on here. Okay. The Prussians established the first public education system. And the reason they did it was because the Prussian emperor wanted to produce obedient soldiers. Disciplined, obedient soldiers. Now, I don't want to get cynical about that because in a society that requires a military, disciplined people who can follow rules are arguably necessary. Now, obviously, that can go very badly, but we got to give the devil his due. And the Prussians actually put forward a very effective military training system. Now, that was adopted in the United States in the late 1800s by industrialists, mostly, self-proclaimed fascists. So at that time, of course, it wasn't Mussolini, Hitler like fascism. It was far the early precursors of that, but they were people who believed that the state and the corporate world could integrate at the highest levels, and there might be some utility in that, which is a very dubious claim, but nonetheless. So they noticed that, they knew that all sorts of rural people were pouring into the cities to start working in factories. Their kids needed to be cared for while they worked, and then their kids were likely to have factory jobs. And so the purpose of the public education system and this is why there's rows of desks and factory bells and this insistence on timing, was to produce disciplined, obedient workers, certainly not to produce people who were autonomous. And that was adopted in the US. The Japanese adopted it and militarized like mad, and part of the consequence of that was the outbreak of the Second World War. And but that being chained to a desk, that's not a bug. That was a feature.
Right.
And you can also even say, well, let's give it some credence. A rural worker, their time schedule is much less stringent than someone who's going to work on a factory.
Right, they're on an agrarian farm.
Yeah.
They're on a farm. Yeah,
You're much looser in your time sense, and it is the case that industrialization requires clock.
Yes.
And so you have to give the devil his due, but in a somewhat post-industrial world, which is what we're in now, it's not obvious at all that obedient worker / soldier is the right model for human development.
Right.
And so, okay, so back to your kids. So now you have kids and you've been...
Yeah, so really not knowing any of that, which I would find out later, we just wanted something different for our children. So we started out with a blank sheet of paper. This is all about the time Khan Academy and some great new things on the internet are bubbling, with the Socratic method, and said, what would we design for our children? And
this is you and your wife.
And my wife gets to be careful, just like Tammy's special. Laura is the one that did all of this, and I kind of come into the picture later. But I'm helping from behind the scenes, but she's really the person who's building this. We started out with 7 children.
And where did you get the other kids?
By talking to everybody in town and seeing who would be crazy enough to join us. Now, by that point, the Acton MBA, named after Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Acton MBA is pretty well known in town, so the fact we start this thing called Acton Academy, it has a little bit of linkage in Austin to be something people might trust us with their children.
Right. So you got a bit of communication clout there.
Yes. So there was enough reputational, that we were able to attract some very committed families. The school takes off. It starts to grow. It's all based on one mission we stayed true to from the start, that every child who enters our school is a genius who deserves to find a calling that will change the world.
Just like physical exercise, daily spiritual exercise is critical to your well-being, especially in a world where attacks on faith and religion are happening all around us every day. There's no better time for a daily habit of prayer than during this season of Lent with Hallow, the #1 Christian prayer app in the US and the #1 Catholic app in the world. With Hallow, you can pray every single day leading up to Easter alongside world-famous Catholics and Christians like Jim Caviezel, Father Mike Schmitz, and even Mark Wahlberg. Dive deep into Scripture and the second most read Christian book of all time, The Imitation of Christ. You'll learn how to become a better individual through prayer, fasting, and giving in spite of today's broken world. Download the app for free at hallow.com/Jordan. Set prayer reminders, invite others to pray with you, and track your progress along the way. Get an exclusive 3-month free trial at hallow.com/Jordan. That's hallow.com/Jordan.
Now, by genius, we don't mean 180 IQ. What we mean is a special talent at something. Because if you're the best plumber in town, you're going to make more money and be happier than the average Ivy League graduate.
Plus, your customers won't be knee-deep in sewage, which is also, that's a
very good
major
thing.
plus.
It's a very plus.
Yeah. When I was at Harvard lecturing there, one of my students, who Daniel Higgins, we were working on formulation of theories of general cognitive ability and then personality predictors of success. At the same time, Howard Gardner was working at the Faculty of Education there, and he produced this theory of multiple intelligence. And it's a preposterous theory on psychometric and scientific grounds, partly because Gardner famously noted that he didn't really care about measurement. And that's a no-go if you're a scientist. It's like, well, there are multiple intelligences, but we can't measure any of them. But having said that, again, you have to give the devil his due, is that cognitive ability does seem to have a unidimensional structure. There's one dimension of being smart or not being smart. And the smarter you are, the faster you can learn a complex job. And so for complex jobs, that's very useful. But the idea that there are multiple talents that's a fine idea. And you see that reflected more in temperament, is that open people are creative and agreeable
Yes.
people like to take care of people, and disagreeable people are competitive and tough, and conscientious people are hardworking and dutiful, and extroverted people like socializing. And so the idea that each person is composed of a composite of traits, and that composite is unique, and that out of that unique composite, something unique and valuable can emerge, that seems extraordinarily probable.
Well, and I'd say the biggest finding we've had has been that children are capable of far more than you've ever imagined. Children will play down to an institutionalized system, but if freed along with structure and responsibility and systems they will build, are capable of incredible things.
In the Michaela School, which takes a very different approach to you, in the UK, it's an inner city school, and there's a wide range of general cognitive ability as a consequence. So you can imagine in a typical class of 30 kids, there would be kids with an IQ of 90 on the low end, likely up to maybe 85 on the low end, and then maybe up to 130 on the high end, right? So a real distribution. But they're teaching at a very high rate, and 75% of their graduates get accepted to Russell Group universities in the UK. And Russell Group includes the big UK universities. So they've managed to set up a system where, regardless of that immense variability in innate intelligence, let's say, there's tremendous emphasis on rapid learning.
Well, so here's where we might differ a bit, or at least what we've discovered. And what we've discovered is, IQ, no question, is the most important determiner of success, or socioeconomic success. But it's still only, 25%, right?
It seems about 25%.
So what we found is, regardless of IQ, if we can build a tribe where every person there believes that they have a calling to change the world, that there is a place in that tribe. Now, if my IQ is 100, I'm not going to be doing three-body orbital problems.
Right.
I just can't do that.
Advanced physics.
Right. Frankly, I can't do that, right? So that's okay. There's other things I can do. So what we've found is there's very little variability in the ability to learn to do things if you provide people with a compelling story and reason. If you provide them with a